This is now going to be part 4 of chapter 14. And chapter 14, I believe, is in 6 small segments. So this is part 4. And now we're going to go see what's happening in the north of Europe. We've spent the last 3 videos in the south. So let's check out the north. So here again is the map of Europe at this time. And you can see by the color code that it indicates clearly which countries are Roman Catholic, I believe. Oh no, it's more of a political map. So this is where we have been, down in Italy, which is still very much divided. And then we jumped over to Spain, but now we're going to go back to Flanders, where we spent quite a bit of time in the Renaissance, and look and see what's happening in Flanders and in Germany and England and France. So just as orientation, I mean, I'll mention it again as we go through there, but France remains largely Catholic. Germany, especially Bavaria, is also Catholic. Flanders is mostly Catholic. But there are lots of spots, especially in northern Germany, that are Protestant, and the Netherlands, largely Protestant. England, of course, by that time had its own church established by King Henry VIII. It's the Church of England. So, as I said, we were going to start in Flanders, and Flanders is largely Catholic country. And our first artist that we're going to look at is a major artist, Peter Paul Rubens. And he's sort of the master, the star of the Flemish Baroque. So he's the most successful Flemish painter. He was from Antwerp. He began his he became aristocratic in behavior. He's very wealthy, very intellectual. He admired Italian Renaissance art and humanism. He also admired ancient art and civilization. He had traveled to Italy. He worked in Italy. He also traveled widely around Europe as a diplomat. He was knighted by Charles I in England, which is rather interesting. I mean, he's Flemish, but he was knighted by the King of England. After his visit to Rome, he worked in very large, full canvases in a style similar to Carracci, who did that ceiling painting called The Loves of the Gods. And so I showed you that, I think, 3 videos ago. To him, to Rubens, the invention of the picture was more important than the execution. His figures are largely buoyant, full of energy. He idealized nature. His early works showed action and drama, and the later ones had more psychological aspects or mood. He built a large house with a studio and had many assistants. So right here on this one slide, I've got some of the biography of Rubens. Here's his self-portrait, wearing very fashionable clothing, fashionable beard and mustache. These two show him, show his family. This is his wife, and this is just the wife and kids over here, and the wife and one child here. This is a painting he did of his house. So his house had 2 buildings. One was where he lived, and the other was his studio. I had an opportunity to visit this, and I believe the building shown here is the studio building, and this is where he lived. But I know how the building was oriented, but I'm not sure where the painting was painted from. So this is a photograph of the inside of his studio building, which has now been converted into a little gallery and a gift shop. I believe the gift shop is back in this section. And just to get you oriented, this is the door. It was a very high door, and it could be opened to allow his really large paintings to be moved out and delivered to the purchasers. But it does kind of look familiar. We see the door and the window up above it, like there. So that seems to fit. he had a whole workshop of people because he was so successful. Let me go back to the last one because you'll be reading those words, and that's very distracting for you. He was so successful commercially and got so many commissions, largely for churches, but also for very wealthy Catholic families as well, that he had a whole workshop full of assistants. So what Rubens would do when he was imagining one of his large paintings, he would draw a small version of it called a sketch, an oil sketch, and he would just sketch it out. So this is his invention of the painting that he thought was so important. And then he would have his assistants build the large canvas, get everything going. They would probably do the preliminary sketching on the canvas following his small version, and then he would come in at the very end and put the finishing touches on it. And so he had a lot of help. Just don't forget that. You got to be kind to him. It was the way of the world. Successful artists had a lot of help. The work of Peter Paul Rubens typifies the Flemish Baroque style. His first major commission was the Raising of the Cross Triptych for the Church of St. Walpurga. This work uniquely sketches the action and landscape of the central scene across all three panels. Wow, I just sneezed. So sorry. So here's the triptych. A triptych is a term for a painting that is in 3 panels. I know you've had that before, but just want to mention it again in case it happens to show up on your quiz. So this is the Raising of the Cross, and it shows his vision, his imagination reconstructing the scene of the crucifixion of Jesus. So let's not criticize it in terms of historical accuracy, but we're going to look at it as a work of art. So we can see that the techniques of Caravaggio are barely at play here, that there's a lot of darkness in the background against which the figures are highlighted. So that's a different way that Rubens is using light. Remember, Caravaggio had his figures just partially illuminated. And here Rubens is fully illuminating the body of Jesus. He is isolating them against the darkness. So he's got a little bit going on. Then he's got a lot of action. So this is very much like Carracci. This is very much like the Counter-Reformation paintings in Rome, with many figures, many very muscular figures working together. You can almost sense this being kind of like photograph taken of an action scene. People would be moving. Rubens was very interested in anatomy, in human anatomy, and so we see a lot of detail, a lot of interest in musculature and the body construction. And you can see that in his the figure of Jesus, and in the men, these very muscular men showing off all their muscles as they raise the cross up. Then the 2 side panels show side figures in the scene as well. So the notes I have on this say the style is powerful synthesis of Italian Renaissance and Baroque. He foreshortened anatomy. You can see that in some of the figures. The diagonal figure of Jesus cuts dynamically and recedes in space. The picture seethes with power from exertion and shows emotional and physical tension. And here's just the center panel, which would be fine. It really could stand alone. It doesn't need the side panels of the triptych. But pieces like this that are so huge would have been commissioned to be placed in a church, usually at the front of the church behind the altar. So it would be a devotional piece as people would be staring at this during the Mass. And the priest, when he celebrates the Eucharist or the Mass, would be standing in front of this. So it would be impactful, I think we could say. So here's another commission he had. And this is an interesting one. In the painting of the royal engagement of Henry IV and Marie de Medici, Henry IV is seen falling in love with Marie as she gazes at her portrait. As he gazes at her portrait, she's not gazing at her portrait. He is surrounded by Roman gods in full lavish color. So this was commissioned by Marie, who's, as her name suggests, is Italian. She was of that famous Medici family in Florence, and she married the King of France. She commissioned this, I believe, after her husband had died. So she's the widow of the king at this point. She commissioned the series, and she wanted Rubens to sort of treat her life like it was a fantasy, almost like this romance, this great epic romance. And so he created a large series of paintings, either 21 or 24. That means that there are 21 that survive. There may have been 3 others, so it depends on who you listen to, whether you believe that or not. So it was all about how she met and fell in love and their fabulous life as these not so ordinary human beings. So in this one, she's still in Italy. She hasn't yet married him, but her portrait was painted by an artist and brought to France and shown to the king. This figure right behind the king, who's whispering in his ear, is a personification of France. And so France is saying, "Oh, your majesty, this is the one for you. You gotta love her. Look at those eyes," or whatever. So this is the moment when the king apparently falls in love with her. But remember, he's dead at this point, and this is Marie de Medici fantasizing about this historical moment. And Rubens gave her a little help, gave her the Roman gods of Jupiter and Juno floating up in the sky, also known as Zeus and Hera, and their attributes are the eagle, which we see over here, and the peacock. They represent marriage, the marriage of the main gods of the pantheon of Rome. I know Jupiter is, well, if you know the stories of Zeus, he was not faithful to his wife, but nevertheless, she is the goddess of marriage. Down here, these 2 figures holding the portrait represent Cupid and Hymen. So Cupid is obviously the god of love or romance, and Hymen of marriage. And then the little putti down on the ground, you can see this one here, is carrying away the shield. So the putti are removing the king's weapons. They're saying, "Oh, the time for war is over. Now is the time for love." So I'm just showing you how to interpret allegorical paintings. I hope you get a kick out of it, because they can be pretty fun. Here is the room in the Louvre Museum in Paris where that entire series is hanging up. Yes, so the Louvre has dedicated an entire room to the Marie de Medici cycle. So if you enjoyed that allegory, you can, if you get to Paris, be sure to go check out the room, because it's full of great stuff. So here's another Rubens painting. This one has much more in common with that raising of the cross than it does the Marie de Medici cycle. So we have Prometheus Bound. Rubens brought in Franz Snyders, a Dutch painter, I think he might be Flemish, actually, to paint the eagle. So this is specialties. This happened a lot in the North, that artists may have specialized in just still lifes, And if an artist was painting, another artist was painting something like a history painting that had a still life in it, he might hire that out to his specialist friend who could come in and do just the still life. So it was pretty common practice. So they both collaborated on this. So the bird was painted by Snyders, and the figure that is not dissimilar to that of Jesus in the raising of the cross. So he's mostly nude, but very muscular and in a nice strong diagonal. His body is illuminated against the dark background of the tree. So you see all the similarities there, I hope. Elements of lighting, composition, and energetic brushwork identify Rubens' style, while Snyder's imprint is tight and detailed. Another characteristic of Rubens, so in addition to having people be very fleshy, he has very fleshy women and often with very rosy cheeks. I'm going to show you some more in a second. So Prometheus Bound. So the story of Prometheus is that he stole fire from the gods. So humans had been living on the earth without fire, if you can imagine that. And he snuck into Mount Olympus and stole it. And for that, he was punished to have his liver eaten out every day by an eagle. It must be very painful. He's still alive. But the eagle would consume his liver, and then it would grow back overnight, and the same thing would happen the next day. That's hell to the Greeks. So here's another example of a Rubens painting where I think he does take something more from Caravaggio, and that is the cropping in. This is the rape of the daughters of Leucippus. And you can see the figures are right up against the bottom of the scene. The figures are clear out to the edge. So it's been cropped in that Caravaggio sense, but not illuminated. Nothing about the style of the figures is like Caravaggio. But here we have the very fleshy women. So if you hear anybody ever call a woman Rubenesque, it's because of Rubens' figures that had women with considerable flesh on them. So here's another Flemish artist. This one is one of my favorites, Antony van Dyck. And this is his painting of Charles I, the King of England, at the hunt. He portrayed the king truthfully, short, but with imposing presence. The thing I love about this is that if you didn't know he was a king, you would just think he was a gentleman out, with his squire and his horse out on a hillside somewhere, just strolling around. I mean, he's got very nice clothes on, but nothing about this says king. He's not wearing a crown. He doesn't have robes or a scepter or anything. So to me, it's kind of casual for the purpose, and I suppose that's why I like it. I also like the fact that Dyke's portraits seem to have very clear sense of a personality in the faces of them. So make up your own mind about that. Van Dyck had an elegant courtly style. He shows absolute authority. The composition, I think, is worth noting that the main figure is not centered. He's not facing us. In fact, he's off to one side and facing kind of off the canvas, but he has turned his head and is gazing directly at us, the viewers. So this king, sadly, I have to tell you the PS to his life, he attempted absolute rule. He refused to call the parliament, and he caused a civil war in England, and he was executed in 1649. Yes, the king was executed not long after this painting was done. So it was a very dark time in English history, but they've pulled out of it. This one is just one that I really love that to me illuminates this. This is Van Dyck, and he did a study of the head of Charles I. So he must have visited Charles I in person and done this study from 3 different angles of the king. So one is a 3/4, one's in strict profile, and one's a frontal view. And so he would use this as a source for his painting. So after he did this painting, then he might have another model stand in this pose and maybe put on this nice satiny jacket. But when he came to the face, then he would refer over here to his prepared sketches. So that just shows you how artists work, which I think is pretty interesting too. And here's a self-portrait. You will see a lot of self-portraits from now on. I just find them kind of charming. You know, how do these artists see themselves? And they're sometimes they're just very idealistic, and sometimes they're just very plain and honest. So you never know. I like this one. So those painters were both Catholic. They were both Flemish. But now we're going to go see some painters that are not. So Protestantism caused a decline in commissions for churches. Artists and the growing wealth in the middle class created a new market. So the Protestants are not interested in filling their churches with sculptures. They don't care about the stories of saints. They don't want sculptures of saints. They really don't want sculptures of the Virgin Mary or paintings of the Virgin Mary. For the most part, Protestant churches tend to look very bare, and that's what this represents here, is a Protestant church. So very little artwork. So that market's gone. So it's the middle class, the people who run shops in the towns, who might want paintings for their homes. So it changes considerably. Now we're in the Dutch Republic, which today is the Netherlands, known as the Netherlands, but at that time it was called the Dutch Republic. And there were many civic groups in the various cities around the Netherlands whose goal it was to do things to make their town better, to make life better. So this is also part of Protestantism, is like emphasizing the here and now and the mission to make life good. And so these civic groups started having their portraits painted. And the one on the left is just, I could tell you who painted it, but it's really not the point. The point is to see how in the 17th century things changed. So these civic groups used to have their portraits painted. Every member of the group would pay a fee, a nominal fee, to have the artist record their face in painting in the group portrait. And this is a lot like in your high school yearbook, maybe your basketball team. Everybody would just line up like that and have their faces recorded. But then we get artists who sort of say, well, why should it be so boring? Because the halls where these people met would be filled with these boring portraits of people. So group portraiture, documenting the membership of corporate organizations, became popular in the Dutch Republic. And Frans Hal, the lead painter of Haarlem, painted loosely in boldly in a new style. So here's one of Frans Hal's group portraits. It's a group of women, and they were like the women regents of, I think it was an old men's home. And instead of just lining them up, he sort of tried to arrange them in a natural way, as if they were sitting and discussing something. So that's what Frans Hals does. And here's another one. So he goes further. He takes this idea and moves with it. This is an archer's guild up at the top, where you get the sense really that the men were sitting around a table discussing something. And it's almost like Frans Hals had a camera, and he's standing over here, and he said, hey, everybody, look at me. And then they turn or lift their heads and look at him, and he's like, snap, takes their picture. So this is sort of the evolution of group portraiture. And here's another Franz Hals. I really, really love this one. In this double portrait of Isaac, Masa, and Beatrix von Wanderlane, Hals captures the warmth and affection of this prosperous couple. So we still have that sense of spontaneity. I like to think that this couple was just sitting out under this tree, chatting, enjoying each other's company, and Franz Hals came along and just, it's like it's a candid photograph. He just said, hey, let me take your picture, click, because you don't get them looking stiff or posed. I mean, look at the man's head is like tipped back like he's even about to say something. And in addition to that, we also get a sense that they really like each other. I mean, she's even got her hand draped over his shoulder. I just think it's a great, great couple portrait. This is one of Franz Hals' most famous portraits. It's called The Laughing Cavalier, but you can kind of see. I mean, he is to the Dutch Republic what Van Dyke was for Flanders. They're just chiefly portraitists, and they do excellent portraits. So here's one of Franz Hals' students, a woman artist named Judith Leicester. Udit created portraits more typical of the Dutch painters of the time. This self-portrait is lively, showing two styles of paintings as exhibited in her figure and the easel behind her. So she mainly painted genre scenes, which means ordinary people in everyday life. And in this case, her genre is this fiddle player, and so she's painting that. But she also is painting her self-portrait here. Notice the very loose brushwork on her sleeve. So Judith Leicester was interesting because she was married to an artist. So it was a husband and wife were both artists, but she was more successful. She made more money at it. So when they had children, he stayed home. He was the house husband, and she did the work. So she supported the family. Her clothing shows that she is from a well-to-do family. So very nice. I think it would be difficult to paint in that very large collar, but maybe she just included it to kind of show it off. I like it. This is the end of part 4 of chapter 14. So you know there's more to come. So stick around. You don't want to miss Rembrandt. I'm just telling you.